guys, Hengist here from House of Hengist Comics, and a big welcome back to the channel, old beans, beansters and beanettes. And ultimately today we're back in Blitzkrieg, episode 31, The Empire Strikes Back, part 2. First, our new segment, and I thought I'd concentrate a little bit more on the British and this position at the dial, because the D plan is critical to understanding the whole philosophy behind the British and Allied defensive plans. And it is on this position that we will see Gamelin commit perhaps a big error when he sends the 7th French Corps up to Breda. They are basically to arrive with all those tanks and find that the Dutch have already withdrawn, and they are the only reserves, as everything else is moving up onto that dial line. Again, they haven't really focused on the Meuse or that area. It's considered very well defended. And the gap, that's critical, because this is where they think the Germans are going to commit their armour, because it's lowland open country. And so their first armoured group is going to move there with all their tanks. But when we look a little bit closer at these maps, you'll see that you've got 4 divisions going into that Dinant-Gimblot gap. But there are another 5 divisions which are going through the Ardennes, and these are the ones that are going to rip out and exploit and break through and get down to Abbeville, Boulogne, Calais, and ultimately to Dunkirk. So if we get back to basically Leuven, we've got the 3rd division up here, south is the 1st division. So let's start by having a quick look at what was happening in the last episode. Well, the Germans are attacking with 3 companies. The main emphasis is to attack the railway yard, which is the infantry's job, and they're taking on the Ulster Rifles. On their furthest and extreme flank, the British are in trouble because there's an armoured car company, but that has been delayed due to civilians and the problems of an overturned wagon in the stream. The Brits have got some 6 Mark 6 tanks which have moved into position. We've also got the arrival of the Coldstream Guards. They're arriving in and around the railway station and have been moving up, as we can see here, trying to occupy that position and stop their flank from being turned. But they're facing German motorised infantry, the Motorsiert, which have arrived too. Artillery is being brought to bear. The British have got horse artillery, but artillery is pounding in on this railway station, taking a lot of casualties from these 2 Geb guns. There have been airstrikes which have targeted both the infantry and of course the armoured cars. They haven't inflicted masses of damage. But at the railway station, the Ulstermen, who initially repulse an attack, are driven in and break through overwhelming fire. At the ford, the German armoured cars are moving forward. They are going to basically be turning that flank and moving on the central objective as well, supported by the Kratschützen who've dismounted. It is a very problematic situation here, but some of the German cars will be leaving the table, taking that flank. And what we can see here is just as the express train is leaving, we're poised for the next stage of this battle. So, without further ado, let's get into the battle action. We rejoin the action as a huge amount of fire is basically being brought to bear on this central position. We've got all sorts of problems as artillery pounds basically the railway lines from the 150mm guns, and it looks as though the British are in quite considerable trouble. However, at the yard all is relatively quiet. But what is going on is Major MacDonald's artillery is not in a great position to support fire. And we can see we've got problems here at the ford. A lot of these armoured cars are being damaged, basically destroyed, set on fire, and we use a simple system. Instead of a bailed out, we use a D6 damage roll, and effectively that determines the number of pins or if there is damage, and hence mechanics can be used. Here you can see on a 1, 2 or 3 that is the number of pins. 4 is basically damage to the main armament, 5 to the mobility of the vehicle, and 6 is a fire on board and immediate reaction test. So as the Kratschützen move forward, basically they've got to the hedge line. They're pouring fire now, and the armoured cars are moving up, supported by 2 anti-tank guns and obviously those 20mm on the trucks. In the centre, the guardsmen basically look rather nervously as this whole German grenadiers move forward. Artillery ranges in now down at the railway yard, and it blows basically the Ulster Rifleman's one IC in half, killing him, which is bad news for the Ulstermen. But basically, we're now going to look at what a small team can do in a context like this. Here we've got a light mortar and an anti-tank rifle. Immediately a shot, smoke is placed in front of one of the tanks, whilst the ATR basically fires on that Mark 6, and effectively, basically it destroys it with a great shot, knocking that out and forcing that platoon ultimately to take a motivation test, which unfortunately it fails. And that vehicle is forced to, basically the last remaining one, flee from the table, basically crossing and damaging terrain in the process as it goes. We've also got a lot more action here at the yard. Effectively, the Ulstermen are dug in. They brought the tanks up, who are bringing down a withering fire onto that wall, only inflicting minor casualties though, nothing too dramatic. But the Germans won't press here, and here's a mistake from the Allies. They pushed their engineers up forward when really I think they should have moved towards the threatened sector, because they were trying to put more pressure and stop the attack on the left flank. But in the centre, the Panzer Grenadiers, or the Motorser, have effectively moved forward. We can see the Kratschützen attacking, and these vehicles all damaged and knocked out. They're easily overrun, basically, tank terror made, and destroy the last of that BREN carrier. That forces a motivation check on the Morrises and the BREN carriers, and both those platoons go, putting basically a company morale test on the entire British forces in that sector. We've got a massive assault now by the German infantry in the centre. This is backed up by those SDK-13s and 2 armoured cars as well, putting withering fire into the Ulstermen, who are effectively in the gendarmerie, and the 1st Guards platoon, who are on that metal fence. They are pinned. Fortunately, it was the last throw of the dice, but that pinned the Guardsmen as the infantry assault, not the armoured cars. They're just giving covering and supporting fire, and basically what we're going to see is multiple platoons assaulting 2 segments, those in the gendarmerie and the Guards as well, and this is all happening at the same time. A huge amount of fire being launched in, but the British are determined to stand. In fact, they've got to stand and hold that ground, or they are effectively going to be overrun. And we see the first assault by the Motorser, which is highly effective, but the British, with that reroll that they have, British Bulldog, managed to counterattack, and the Guards are also unflappable, so that is really a strong factor. But the fighting here is just so intense. Back and forth it goes. I think there were 3 to 4 turns just in this one phase of the melee, and both sides just keep fighting, and the casualties are huge. But the Guards take more casualties, and the 1st Motorser platoon basically is driving them back, effectively forcing them to fall right back. And in fact, the Ulstermen as well are driven off, which is basically a terrible situation, with them both taking 70% casualties. It is really bad, but they haven't broken. They refuse to break, and the Guards here continue their fight at that front line against the 2nd Motorser platoon. They're getting whittled down, and casualties. It's close hand-to-hand fighting, guys, and lots of grenades, but they are ultimately repelled as well, forced back towards the railway station, with effectively only about 12 men left, and the company 1 IC for the Guards. But the British are determined and desperate as well to retain this position, and they look for an opportunity to counterattack. At every opportunity in the fight, they don't break off until the very end, and we now have that company morale test, and unfortunately the Inniskillens break. That forces a trigger on the Guards and the Ulstermen. Both rolls, however, are successful, and there's a huge cheer from the British as they stand their ground, even though the tanks have gone. And the Inniskillens, basically, and the Guards are to do so well. No wonder the British spirit is high, but they have got so depleted in those 2 battles. But it's now the time of the artillery, and the Royal Horse Artillery, although led by a shaking major, he basically gives the old Waterloo call. Now's your time, Sergeant Maitland. Open fire, supercharged ammunition, independent fire, fire at will, and those guns pound the Germans, catching 3 platoons under it and destroying approximately 26 men in 1 salvo alone. The Germans look crestfallen, and now they charge back into the action. Effectively, the the Ulstermen now charging with this command team from the heavy machine guns. They bring everything to bear and go desperately into this battle and are doing quite well. But in the counter-attack, that triggers that first depleted platoon, which joins in and effectively drives them back. Ultimately, the Ulstermen are to fall to a man. Desperate, heroic, brilliant. But they can't hold on to the gendarmerie. And they have been wiped out, which has put the Ulstermen down to a very difficult position. You know, heroes to the last man they were. But the Guards have only got about 8 men left in that railway station. The Germans, they have suffered 80% casualties on both platoons in this huge battle that has taken place, and they have been basically saved by the support of those armoured cars, which are now ordered to start pulling off down that road with the Kratschützen. It's a desperate situation for the British. What can they do? And the answer is very little. The commander knows he has got to hold in the town as well, and so he opts to withdraw. Major MacDonald, of course, being the first man out of that front line. And so, ultimately, guys, it's an outstanding German victory, well deserved, well played. They had the weight of numbers. So what can we say in postscript? Just absolutely magic. The fight around that railway station will go into legend. It was unbelievable what the Ulstermen did. The Guards fought to the last, and it really shook up the Germans. But their command led very well, as usual. He knew that artillery was coming in. He knew he'd take casualties. Was dynamic and at the critical point. And although we'll see a lot of prisoners taken, there were so many casualties that were killed. And the Germans now, in a depleted state, have got to break into Leuven as well. The British armour, there's not much left in this sector, and it's pulling out, as well as some Belgian elements as well, because the Dial line was to be basically withdrawn. If they'd stayed more dug in, it could have made a massive difference. But there are lots of factors affecting that. But the British morale is high. They've taken a lot of casualties, and the Ulstermen would deserve the Dial on their colours, frankly, looking at this action. So when we examine the game, it was overwhelming our odds, but we balanced that with the forward and the delaying actions there, and we knew ultimately the armoured cars would go round the town, so to speak. The British fought very well. You know, where was the RAF? Well, the RAF is being shot to pieces over the Meuse, trying to blow the bridges up, and this attack is going on. You know, tank support is minimal and localised, and we won't see a counter-attack until Arras. But I think the Guardsmen also, you know, demonstrated just, you know, why they are so remarkable, and they fought with great elan. Can I recommend Adaday's work as well? I basically have seen these two videos, and I really recommend them, from these Hearts of Iron. He's on YouTube. You know, I think it's about 50 minutes viewing, but critical viewing, guys. And also this work here as well for the BEF in terms of, you know, detail on your vehicles and stuff like that. But let's not also forget we're going to see the Highlanders. And although the 51st Division was to be basically situated behind the Maginot to provide that sort of inter-allied support and to bolster, I think, French morale, they're also got battalions fighting along the Dial and at smaller actions. And we've got wonderful work by Johnny Walker, and we'll see Frank Keast and Johnny Walker's guys in action basically coming up. But it's a bloody long road to Dunkirk, and we've got a hell of a lot more actions coming up. One of my favourite periods, you know, obviously the evacuation, the miracle of Dunkirk, but equally was the miracle of the German success. You know, they were fantastic in terms of exploiting their great tactics. But casualties and soldiers, you know, were honoured, although there was a lot of problems between the French and the British because they pulled out early. Let's also remember that ordinary soldiers respected each other's, you know, commitment and valour. So always remember the fallen, guys. And this is Blitzkrieg. So stay safe, stay lucky, and stay tuned for a hell of a lot more coming up as this series basically gets bigger, bolder, and better. So it's bye for now. Over and out.